Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Viendo la expectación y lo lleno que está hoy el centro Azcuna y viendo algunas de las caras de emoción entre el público, incluida probablemente la mía propia, tengo que decir que es un enorme lujo, un honor tener esta noche en Bilbao a Paul Auster, un autor americano que ha marcado, yo creo, a toda una generación de lectores en Europa. Esta noche confío en que tengamos la oportunidad de hablar de muchos temas y uno de ellos, uno de los principales, será las distintas versiones de una vida, de una misma persona, ¿no? Y la versión que tenemos hoy de Paul Auster no es una versión cualquiera, es un escritor ante probablemente su obra magna. Y no solo por el tamaño y por la ambición literaria con la que está escrita, sino por su propia naturaleza, ¿no? 4321 es una especie de microcosmos del universo de Paul Auster. Aquí están todos sus temas, todas sus obsesiones, sus fetiches. Aquí hay referencias a toda su obra, recuerdos de su propia vida. Y curiosamente y paradójicamente, además es la novela en la que supone una ruptura más clara con su estilo y incluso con la temática que le ha hecho famoso. 4321 es la historia de Archie Ferguson, o más exactamente, y de ahí el título, las historias paralelas de 4 versiones de Archie Ferguson. Cuatro personas que comparten el código genético, pero que por distintas circunstancias en la vida, por distintas casualidades o decisiones o eventos fortuitos, se han convertido en 4 vidas distintas. Si te parece, bueno, welcome, Mr. Auster. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Y bueno, si me permite, me gustaría a lo largo de la conversación preguntarle por algunos sucesos fortuitos que en diferentes momentos de su propia vida han podido condicionar su carrera o su vida como escritor. En el primero era usted un niño, tenía 8 años, se encontró de repente en un partido con su héroe del béisbol, Willie Mays, y venciendo su timidez le pidió un autógrafo. ¿Qué pasó?
Willie Mays was the greatest player of the generation that I grew up in. And I approached Willie Mays after a game, and I said, Mr. Mays, he was 24 years old, Mr. Mays, could I please have your autograph? And he said, sure, kid, sure. Got a pencil? Can you hear now? Okay. Oh, it's very loud. Sure, kid, sure. You got a pencil? Well, I didn't have a pencil. And my father didn't have one, and my mother didn't have one, and nobody had a pencil. And he said, sorry, kid, ain't got no pencil, can't give no autograph. And I was pretty shattered, I have to say. And after that day, I always walked around with a pen or a pencil in my pocket because I didn't want to be caught empty-handed the next time. And then, as I like to tell my children, well, that's how I became a writer.
El segundo suceso en orden cronológico es un suceso mucho más trágico. Cuando tenía 14 años estaba en un campamento de verano, hubo una gran tormenta y un rayo alcanzó a un niño que estaba apenas, estaba junto a usted. Solo un palmo le separó en aquel momento de su propia muerte. ¿En qué medida eso ha condicionado ese episodio, que además aparece de alguna manera en la nueva novela? ¿En qué medida eso ha condicionado su carrera o su vida?
I think it was probably the most important experience I had as a young person. Until that day, I thought I was walking on fairly solid ground. And then for a boy just my age to be extinguished in 1 second by a force literally from the heavens, changed my thinking about the world. And I understood then that anything can happen to anybody at any moment. And I think it's informed all my work. I think it's affected how I think about the world and the kinds of books I've written because of that. And I've been haunted by it all my life. I think about it often. And that is the autobiographical core of this book, that incident. I don't tell it as it actually happened, but there are two versions of that story that take place in the novel. I actually did write about it in a very objective way years ago in a piece called Why Write, which is in a little book, I don't know if it's in Spanish, but a little book I think it is, called The Red Notebook. The Red Notebook. And I describe what happened. But in any case, that story is at the heart of this novel. And the rest of the novel is not autobiographical at all. The Archies are not me, but they share my birth year and they share the places where I lived and grew up, and then the cities I lived in when I was older. In some sense, the Fergusons resemble me, but the actual stories I tell in the novel are not based on my own experiences.
¿Cuál sería bueno, hablaba en el lugar de nacimiento, y hay también otras cosas más accidentales con algunos de ellos, pues la buhardilla de París, la traducción de poesía francesa. ¿Cuál sería el principal rasgo que os diferencia, ¿no? A ver, perdón.
What's going on?
A ver, ¿ahora? Bueno, no, decía que... No, they weren't hearing me.
No, but someone just ran out of the room.
There's probably a technician to fix it. But I think I managed.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Bueno, decía eso. ¿Cuál sería el principal rasgo que aparte de todas las similitudes, los principales rasgos que le separan a usted de los Ferguson? De los distintos Ferguson.
Well, there are two. Number one, his experiences are different from mine. And number two, at a more basic level, all of the Fergusons are very precocious. They're able to do things at a young age that most people aren't, and I certainly was not capable of doing. They all four of them tend towards an interest in writing in various forms, whether it's journalism or poetry or translation or criticism or fiction. And I've been interested in all those things, not journalism, but all the others, since my early days as a child. But I was not capable of producing the quality of work that they are at remarkably young ages, 18 and 20 years old. So that's probably the biggest difference, besides having a life completely unlike my own. Yeah.
Más allá del rol de lo inesperado que hablábamos antes, en 4321 parece investigar esas otras vidas que corren paralelas a nuestra existencia real en nuestras mentes, ¿no? Esa idea de qué habría pasado si, ¿no? ¿Qué habría sido de mí si no hubiera cogido ese avión, si no me hubiera cruzado con esa persona, si no hubiera tomado esa decisión? Es algo así como un ejercicio cotidiano íntimo que nos convierte a todos los seres humanos en creadores de ficciones, ¿no? En novelistas de alguna manera.
Well, I agree. I think we all ask these questions, what if? And we can think of two kinds of what ifs. The first what if is the circumstances that surround us, things over which we have no control. Who our parents are, for example, what town we live in, what country we grow up in, what period of history we grow up in. Am I a child in a city occupied by a foreign army? Am I a child in a place ravaged by war? Or am I a child living in peace? Am I rich or am I poor? All these things children just have to accept. So there are those variations. And then there are the variations or the choices we make. Sometimes unconscious choices. For example, why did I go to that party that night? And why did I meet that woman? And why did I fall in love with her and marry her and then have a terrible marriage and get divorced 10 years later? And if I hadn't gone to that party, it wouldn't have happened. On the other hand, it can be the opposite. Lucky for me, I went to that party. I met the woman of my dreams, and we've been married happily ever after. I mean, all these things that we don't know the consequences of our decisions. One important decision we make is what kind of work we want to do, or what school we want to go to if we're students. And you think, well, I can go to X, Y, or Z university, and all the choices seem equal, but actually you're opening the door on three different fates, in a sense. Three different narratives are going to unfold, but you don't know what it is yet. You'll have a different set of friends, different set of teachers, and everything will be different. And so these things, I think everyone thinks about. And I suddenly had this bolt of inspiration one day, back in 2013, so four years ago, sitting at my breakfast table, drinking a cup of tea, and reading the newspaper, and suddenly I thought, why not write a novel about one person, but with multiple parallel lives, and see how this plays out? And I got so excited by the idea that all of a sudden, stories started spinning around in my head. And within a few days, I was already writing some of the opening passages of the book. And it was really quite an adventure, I have to say. Yeah.
Una lectura quizá más pesimista de la novela sería que la vida, igual que el escritor de alguna manera, una
forgetting to do this. He has such a nice voice too.
Decía que una lectura más pesimista de la novela sería que la vida, igual que el escritor, no es un creador de personas o de vidas, sino que las destruye. Es decir, que elimina a todos los otros seres que podríamos haber sido e indulta caprichosamente solo a uno, ¿no?
Well, the fact is we only do live one life. And it's fascinating to speculate on the possible alternative lives we might have led, but finally we're always traveling on our one single road, no matter how many twists and turns it might take. I don't know if I want to give away too much about the things that you learn at the end of the book, about the nature of the book. But I agree with you, but at the same time, if I talk about it, I might spoil it for people who want to read the novel. So I'll just be quiet about that. Yeah.
Sí, porque el que piense que estamos destripando... Bueno, estamos ante Paul Auster, y el que piense que estamos destripando la novela, que no se preocupe, porque al final, en las últimas páginas, hay un cambio que digamos que lo pone todo patas arriba, o sea, que no se preocupe. Estamos en Paul Auster siempre estamos en territorio familiar, pero a la vez desconocido, ¿no? Y esto es el propio narrador lo pone me voy a permitir leer un fragmento del libro, lo pone al describir las intenciones literarias de Ferguson, ¿no? Dice: combinar lo extraño con lo familiar, a eso aspiraba Ferguson, a observar el mundo tan detenidamente como el más entregado realista y, sin embargo, a crear una forma de ver la realidad a través de un prisma diferente, ligeramente deformante. ¿Cómo se consigue eso? ¿O cuál es el secreto?
I'm not sure that that's what I think, but this is what Ferguson thinks. He's a boy of about 17 when he comes up with this thought. And yet, I think there's some truth to that as a description of how I've approached writing. But the kinds of stories, Ferguson 4, we're talking about number 4, the one who's interested in writing fiction. The kinds of stories he writes as a young person were not the kinds of stories I wrote. So I guess, the temptation to see these Fergusons as me, P.A., rather than A.F., is very strong. But I have to emphasize again that it's really fiction. It's an invention. So the Ferguson, the writer, is not really like the writer I was and am right now. My memory is getting better.
El libro está lleno de referencias literarias, es casi como para ir apuntando y creando listas de lectura. Y en concreto hay un homenaje a Borges, que ya se ha citado también anteriormente como influencia de Trilogía de Nueva York y de otras obras suyas. Se trata, como se advierte al final de la novela, del relato del jardín de los senderos que se bifurcan, ¿no? En cuyo centro hay una novela donde todos los desenlaces de un acontecimiento tienen lugar simultáneamente. ¿En qué medida le ha influido Borges en este libro o en su carrera en general, y qué otros autores consideraría que han sido determinantes en su carrera?
When I read Borges, I was fascinated by it. I was probably about 19, I think. And I really did like it a lot, and I still like it. And there's much in his work that I admire very much. But I can't really see how he influenced me. I think the influence he might have had was think big. Allow your imagination to roam and take you where it will. I think it's that gift that he has of being able to follow his own thoughts. Because certainly the things that I have written don't sound anything like Borges at all. And he never wrote novels. He wrote short pieces. And the things that are lacking in Borges are things that I've been quite interested in. The big tug and pull of physical life, living inside a body. Borges is mostly living inside his head. And I'm a novelist and not a short story writer or a philosopher, which I think of him as sometimes. Other writers, well, there's so many. In terms of, let's just stick to writing fiction, not poetry, because that's a whole other subject. I think the writers that I most liked when I read them first, and still like most, would be, another Spanish language writer, Cervantes, Don Quixote, which, again, I read it when I was about 18 or 19, and that blasted me apart. I found it the novel that contained all novels, the early giant piece of fiction that somehow mapped out all the possibilities of how to write fiction. And it's very funny, and it's also very moving, and it's full of surprises. And I think Cervantes is the writer who has taught novelists the most of all. The first novel that absolutely turned me inside out, and here I do give this experience to one of the Fergusons, when I was 15 years old reading Crime and Punishment. That was a turning point in my life. I'd always read, and I had actually been writing stories and poems since I was about 10 years old. But when I read the Dostoevsky, I was so overwhelmed by it that I thought, if this is what a novel can be, if this is what a novel can do to you, then I want to write novels. I can't think of anything better in the world than that. So Dostoevsky and other Russians such as Tolstoy and Gogol and Chekhov, these are very important writers to me. And then a later short story writer, Isaac Babel, who's a 20th century writer, a genius. And then there are a lot of American writers that were important, particularly Thoreau, who's written about in the book. And I've written about Thoreau several times over the years in my novels. And Melville and Hawthorne in terms of fiction. And then there are the French. And then in the 20th century, I would say the writers that have meant the most to me were, first of all, James Joyce, who had an enormous impact on my thinking, again, about how to write and what you could do as a writer, and Kafka, who is maybe my favorite 20th century writer. I keep going back to him. I never get tired of it. It's wonderful. And Beckett. Beckett was a big force, especially when I was in my 20s. There was a long period when I couldn't see my way around Beckett. I thought he had made the last possible statement you could make about writing fiction. So it was a bit of a burden and at the same time a great inspiration. Finally, I saw my way around it by forgetting about him, because you can't follow Beckett. He leads you over a cliff or into a dead end. So I learned my lesson. But this thing about, mentioning books inside a book and movies inside the book and artworks inside the book and pieces of music inside the book, the novel's filled with this. And I've always been surprised and somewhat puzzled that most novelists, when they're writing about their characters, they never read. They never go to the movies. They don't watch TV. They don't do any of the things that we all do and feel enriched by often. So my view of the novel is put everything in, because everything is interesting. And so I think right from the beginning I've had characters reading books, and that's the case here as well.
Hay las pasiones de juventud de los cuatro Fergusons, efectivamente, son los libros, el cine, el deporte, que también era una pasión suya en la infancia, y también el sexo, la preocupación del sexo. No sé, por lo menos las cuatro primeras las comparte. No sé si la quinta fue tan precoz o comparte también, pero casi todas son reflejo también de su propia historia, ¿no?
Well, not just me and Ferguson, but me and the whole world, pretty much. Most boys in the period when I was growing up were interested in playing sports. And if a boy was not good at it, it was somehow something difficult in that boy's life. But most of us, even the less than good ones, tried very hard and took some pleasure in it. Well, I mean, who isn't interested in sex? There wouldn't be a world unless we were interested in sex. Well, there'd be a world, but human beings wouldn't be in it. And all these things, is this working? Yeah? All the Fergusons, too, are very sensitive to music. They respond deeply to it, which is something I share with them. But again, I'm not alone. I think, there's barely a person on this planet who doesn't respond to music of one kind or another, and not just respond, but love it and feel that it's an integral part of life itself, listening to music.
Empezó a escribir esta novela a los 66 años, que era la edad que tenía su padre cuando falleció repentinamente. traspasar esa barrera de esa frontera de la edad en la que murió su padre, ha dicho que de alguna manera le afectó, ¿no? Le hizo pensar más en la muerte repentina, y de alguna manera cambió su forma de pensar, ¿no?
I don't think it changed the way I think. It was simply that I felt as if I were crossing through this invisible curtain. To get to be older than your father ever got to be is a strange moment for a man, or to be older than your mother, for that matter, ever got to be. So that year, when I turned 66, my thoughts did turn to death, thinking, well, maybe my time is coming also. Because he was a healthy person. He was never sick. And he didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he was very strong, and he dropped dead of a heart attack unexpectedly. So, yes, that year I was thinking a lot about it, and that was also the year I started writing this book. And I kept thinking that I have to live to finish it. Everything depends on it. And I thought at first it would take me 5 or 6 years to do it. Based on the rate of composition that I've generally had over the years. But I kind of doubled down with this. And I simplified my life to an extreme degree. I stopped traveling. I stopped doing any literary events. I didn't do any interviews. Siri, my wife, and I, she's writing, of course, just as intensely as I am. We were in a period of a lot of literary production. We didn't even go out and see friends very often. We were just writing. And so I managed to do the book in 3 years. And then there was about a 6-month period of making corrections, going over proofs, and so on. So the whole thing took about 3.5 years, which seemed to me very fast, really. But it was because I didn't do anything else. And it was, it was something I felt I had to do. And I'm glad I managed not to die in the middle. That would have been pretty pathetic, right?
Usted nunca ha escondido su compromiso político, incluso participó activamente en las revueltas estudiantiles en Colombia, que también describe en la novela, por cierto. ¿Cómo vive alguien como usted, con sus ideas y su trayectoria, la situación actual o el momento político actual que atraviesa su país? Y el mundo, por extensión.
Well, I've always been interested in politics, but I've always wanted to be a writer, and I felt early on that there was this conflict, that I didn't see a way to be a poet, novelist, and also to be an activist. And I made a decision early, and maybe it was the wrong decision, that the writing was more important, even though I had very strong political beliefs and convictions. Now that I'm older and I get to do things like this, talk to you, and in Europe, unlike America, people actually have an interest in hearing what writers have to say about things other than their own books. And so it's been an opportunity lately for me to speak out about what I think. I've done a number of TV interviews with British television, both before and after the recent presidential election. And it has been satisfying for me, I think, just to get out my feelings publicly. I mean, there have been moments in the past when I've stood up and I've written things for some cause that I believed in very deeply, but it wasn't a regular habit of mine, only exceptional cases, such as my gigantic fight with Erdogan, head of Turkey, about 5 years ago, when I explained in a newspaper interview that I had turned down every invitation to go to Turkey as a protest against the jailing of writers and journalists in that country. And that led to a big public fight between him and me over the next several days. It was invigorating. I liked fighting with that tyrant. Now we have done something really strange in America. We've elected a madman as president. And I am not alone in thinking this. My opinions finally are not much different from the opinions of millions and millions of other people. But I've been given the chance to express my thoughts publicly, and I've done it. I don't know where we're going. I don't know what's happening. I can't make any predictions. The fact that a person like Donald Trump can exist, I accept it. He is who he is. There are plenty of crazy people in the world. But they don't have 63 million people vote for them for president. So I think it's more a question of what's happened to my country that we would elect such a person who is out to only enhance himself, has no interest in anything beyond himself. He doesn't understand the history of America. He doesn't understand the Constitution of the United States, the laws, the way the government is set up. I think he actually thought he was running for dictator, and that once he was in office, he could do anything he wanted. So he's learned that this isn't quite true. But he's already done a lot of damage, and he's going to continue to do it. And I have some consolation in the fact that there's a big movement against him in the country. And for the first time, and we're really 50 years, a new wave of activism has spread across the United States. And people understand that they've been too complacent, and they have to get busy working hard to resist him. And in fact, the whole Republican agenda, which is really an inhumane and cruel and finally self-defeating approach to life and government. But who knows what's going to happen? As I said earlier, he could drop dead tonight of a heart attack or a stroke, and then we wouldn't have to think about him anymore. But he could also be president for 8 years, and then where will we be? I don't know.
Y ese movimiento de protesta del que hablaba, ¿desde qué lugar, como personaje público, desde qué lugar ha decidido afrontarlo? ¿Desde la retaguardia, desde la trinchera, desde la guerrilla?
I'm just going to speak out whenever I can. That's my plan. I don't see the need to write articles because so many people are doing it, and there's so many good things. And Siri Hustvedt, my wife, has written numerous things about the current situation. And I agree with these pieces entirely. It would be bizarre if we were both doing it, writing the same essays. So Siri's doing the writing, I'm doing the talking in public. And she's talking in public as well. But what's interesting about what's going on in the United States, too, is the big push against Trump is coming from women. And women seem to be leading this new resistance. And I think it's terrific. It's one of the very good aspects of what's been going on. And I think we're going to see many more women running for office in the United States, and many more women taking important positions of power in the country. Because I think, finally, Hillary Clinton was defeated because she was a woman. That was the the basic thing. The misogyny in the country, the fact that the right wing had a black man in the White House for 8 years. This caused a tremendous negative reaction in a large percentage of the country who couldn't stand the idea that Obama was the president. And then the thought that a woman would be president for the next 8 years, too much. And so I think she was defeated essentially because she wasn't a man, which is a pretty sad thing to have to say, but I'm pretty sure I'm right.
Cuando cumplió 50 años, en la década de sus 50 años, escribió sobre hombres debilitados, estaba la presencia de la muerte en los pensamientos de algunos, habló de Book of Illusions, Tombuctú, y al cumplir los 60 parece haber vuelto la mirada hacia atrás en el tiempo. ¿A qué obedece eso? Empezó con las dos novelas fragmentariamente autobiográficas, las dos libros fragmentariamente autobiográficos. ¿A qué obedece ese proceso?
It's a good question. I don't really know the answer to it, but I think when I look at people I know, when they get older, they tend to look back. I think you reach a certain age when you're kind of reviewing your life. You're going over everything you've done, preparing for the final period. And, I work very unconsciously. I don't really know what I'm doing most of the time. I write books out of some blind need to write that particular book. And that's how Winter Journal was written, and which was a kind of meditation or poem or piece of music about somehow the history of my body. And then after I finished it, I realized there's more I wanted to say. And I wrote another book, Report from the Interior, which is kind of the twin. They belong together. Those two books were the first time that I had seriously looked back on my childhood and tried to make some sense of it. And I found I was able to find things that I thought I had forgotten. Not everything. I mean, most of my early life is gone. But there are some notable experiences that are still very vivid in me. And then as thinking about them, I found others. And I think writing those two books plowed the ground for this novel. If I hadn't written those two books, this book wouldn't have been written. But then the impulse was to treat childhood in fictional form rather than in autobiographical form. And one of my friends in America who's young, he's younger than I am, he's about 35, and he read the book and he said for him the greatest pleasure of the book was feeling the difference between what it's like to be 6 years old and 8 years old, and 8 years old and 11 years old, because we're going through such enormous changes every year throughout our childhoods that it takes real deep spiritual work to put yourself in the kind of trance that will allow you to feel the difference between 8 and 10, as a 66-year-old person. And so obviously I was calling forth my own memories, but then transforming them into these fictitious situations. But, I mean, every writer finally only has his own experience to draw upon.
Y ese viaje atrás no es solo en su propia vida, sino en su país, en el mundo incluso, ¿no? Que en ese proceso que ha descubierto que echa de menos y que da por felizmente superado.
I don't understand this
So,
one. Say it again.
what do you miss of those years, and what do you just find it's good that it's over?
Oh, miss in the sense of not forget, but what I regret.
What you would like
to have
would you
back.
prefer- yeah.
Yeah. What I. Okay. Well.
I mean, not of your personal life, obviously,
Yes.
but of the situation, the society.
Well, I think life has gotten both better and worse. It's both things happening at once. Because if you really go back to the days of my childhood, the 1950s, which people have this nostalgic view of America in the 1950s as a kind of golden age, when everything worked and everyone was happy, everyone had money, everyone had a job. Well, I suppose if you were a white person of a certain income, maybe this was sort of true. But that's forgetting everybody else in the country. I mean, women were oppressed, black people were oppressed, abortion was illegal, there were all kinds of very harsh laws about all kinds of things. Plus, we were living in a time of tremendous fear, the early days of the Cold War, and this hysterical anti-communism that permeated every inch of American life for more than a decade, really. So those are not the good old days, even though people think they were. On the other hand, there's certain things I miss about the world of my childhood and youth. You know, the sound of typewriters.
But you still hear them.
I still hear it. Double feature movies. Basketball without the three-point shot, you know? Things like that I think were much better. Record stores, you know? There are no record stores anymore. It's terrible. I spent so many hours of my youth looking through records and finding things that I never would have known about, because you can't discover things on the internet. You have to know what you want, but you can't make surprising discoveries. So there are a lot of things that I miss, and there are a lot of things I don't miss at all. So it's both. It's both.
El libro, comentábamos al principio, encierra también una ruptura estilística, ¿no? Ya parece que no hay rastro casi del minimalismo que había sido marca de la casa. Las oraciones pasan de una página a otra. En las propias páginas se encuentra una explicación, o se puede encontrar una explicación, ya me dirá usted si es correcto, cuando Ferguson 4 desprecia el clásico consejo de mostrar y no contar, a favor de contar, contar y contar, ¿no? ¿Eso es algo que ha experimentado usted también?
I've always just told and told and told. I've never really thought of myself as a novelist, but as a storyteller. And I never have thought of myself as a minimalist either. But of course, yes, my early novels were much more spare. But I think something happened to me, but not with this book. It was about 4 books ago with a novel called Invisible. And in Invisible, I found this other way of writing sentences. Some door opened, and I started to explore it. I mean, that was the book in which I wrote in different persons: first person, second person, you, and third person. The book is filled with a kind of multifarious approach. Plus, the sentences started to get longer. And then that continued through Sunset Park, the next novel. I mean, there's some sentences in that novel that are 2 and 3 pages long also. And then in the 2 books we were just talking about, Winter Journal and Report from the Interior, also these long sentences. Maybe they're even longer here now in the new book. But there's a kind of dance, a whirl of dance in these long sentences that have to me, a propulsion that keeps thrusting you forward, both as the writer and I think as the reader too. You just start, it's like almost riding a surfboard. You're on the waves and you're going, and you're keeping your balance, and it's kind of exhilarating to do that, to experience that.
Hablaba antes de que al contrario que Ferguson, usted no fue un escritor precoz. Sí fue un lector precoz, tengo entendido, además en una casa en la que no había libro, no había lectura, no había mucha lectura. ¿Cómo recuerda, cómo despertó en usted esa pasión por la lectura y la escritura, que si no me equivoco empezó con poesía?
Yeah, you've really done your research very well. You've really prepared. It's extraordinary how accurate everything you say is. I'm very impressed. You must be an excellent reporter. I mean, really. No, it's all true. My parents did not go to university. They didn't read books. But for some reason, I don't know why, I liked them as a boy. And in the town where I lived, we had a good public library, and I would get books out of the library. Why did I write that first poem when I was about 9 years old? I can remember the circumstances that I was walking through a park, which was somehow between my house and the center of the town. I was on my way to do something in the town. But I was all alone, and it was a Saturday morning, and it was early spring. It was one of the first nice days of the year. And I just felt exhilarated. I was so happy that winter was over. And the impulse was to write a poem about it. And I remember I went into town, I bought a notebook, and I started writing, an awful, stupid, ridiculous poem about spring. But no matter how terrible it was, it made me feel good. It made me feel something different about myself in relation to the world. I felt more connected to the things around me, because in order to write, you have to pay attention. And when you're paying attention, you're absorbing a lot more than when you're just walking along looking at the clouds. And I found this so invigorating that every time I tried to write something, even if it was terrible, this feeling of connection would come over me. And I still feel that now, that I'm sitting alone in a room for hours, and yet I feel absolutely immersed in the world in ways that I don't necessarily feel when I'm actually in the world. It's bizarre, but that's how it works. Yeah.
Y usted conoció el éxito relativamente tarde, casi, si no me equivoco, casi con 40 años. Incluso asegura que La ciudad de cristal, la primera parte de la trilogía de Nueva York, fue rechazada 17 veces antes de ser publicada. Habla de eso en Asalto de Mata, el segundo de los libros autobiográficos, que subtitula Crónica de un fracaso precoz. ¿Cómo vive esos años y qué mensaje cree que pueden extraer de ello los aspirantes a escritores o los aficionados a la escritura?
Well, I had a strange life. I was a very stubborn person, probably stupidly so. I only wanted to be a writer. I didn't want to do anything else. So I mostly didn't have money. And money was a big problem for me throughout the first half of my adulthood, because I didn't want to have a regular job. I don't know why I was so stubborn, but I was. And I think, and then all those rejections of the novel, as I was saying earlier, I think it was actually good for me. Because it clarified why I was writing. And I understood I wasn't writing for money, and I wasn't writing even to get published. Because as that first book was making the rounds of the New York publishers, I was writing the second book of the New York trilogy. And then I was halfway into the third when the book was finally accepted by a very small publisher. And then he was so small that the advances I got on the 3 volumes were $100 each, which is hardly a good way to make a living. And then I wrote that book, Hand to Mouth, in the mid-90s, just sort of looking back at this period of immense struggle and sort of mystified by the way I behaved and how, so we have in America how-to books. Mm-hmm. They teach you how to do something. Well, I think Hand to Mouth is a how not to book. And it's if a young writer would read it, I would hope that he or she would not follow my example and be a little more sensible about taking care of practical things as well as artistic things.
Bueno, me advierten que tenemos que ir acabando, me quedan un montón de preguntas y de temas que querría tocar. Voy a intentar juntar dos preguntas o dos historias que tienen que ver con lo que hablábamos al principio de las circunstancias que han podido cambiar su vida y su carrera y que tienen que ver con este momento del que estábamos hablando ahora. Sería la muerte de su padre de nuevo, que le empujó de alguna manera a escribir La invención de la soledad, y un año después, precisamente, un año antes, de la publicación de ese libro, el conocer a su actual mujer, que ha sido también una persona, digamos, crucial en su edad adulta y en su carrera, ¿no? Me habla, no sé si para terminar, o no sé si tendremos tiempo, pero un poco de esos dos momentos o de esas dos circunstancias.
Well, you talked earlier about, significant moments. Well, meeting Siri was the most significant moment. I was 34 years old. I had just turned 34, and I was separated from my first wife. We hadn't been together for 3 years. And I happened to go to a poetry reading, which was in this big place, the 92nd Street Y. We were talking about it earlier. This is a famous place in New York City where they've been doing readings for over 75 years now. And it's about 1,000 people in the audience. And actually, it was an old girlfriend of mine, a very good poet, was reading there for the first time in her life. And I wanted to go there just to lend support. But I had just been on a trip, and I had come back, and I was hesitant about going. But then I said, no, I must go. And I'm glad I did, because there was Siri. And we only knew one person in common in the entire universe. And he happened to be the person who had accompanied her to the reading. And she was a graduate student at Columbia, and so was he. And but he was quite a bit older and married, and I knew his wife. And then he's with this beautiful young woman, and I thought, well, he's cheating on his wife. And he introduced us, and so I was very polite. I said, very nice to meet you, and all the while just overwhelmed by Siri's beauty. She hadn't yet said much, but she just as a presence, she was extraordinary. And then the three of us talked for a moment, and then he turned around and went to talk to somebody else. And I realized that they weren't a couple at all. And so she and I started talking and talking and talking. We talked for hours. We left, we went elsewhere, and we wound up that night together. And we've been together ever since, 36 years since that night. I can't imagine my life without her. I mean, talk about parallel lives and, the Fergusons. I can't imagine an Auster without his beloved Siri in it in some way or another. She is, just as a writer now, one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. And not only as a novelist, but as a thinker and an essayist, and actually involved in science, in neuroscience. She's teaching at a medical school. Her students are young psychiatrists who are doing their residencies at the hospital. And she's giving classes to them about writing about their patients and how to think about their patients. It's an amazing business to have shared all these years with her, this long conversation we've had. I share everything I write with her. She is my prime reader, and nothing leaves the house until it has the series stamp of approval on it. And she gives me all her work, and I give her my comments as well. And we have the rule of total honesty. Never just, a pat on the back, good job. No, really trying to understand what the other is trying to do, and then trying to suggest things that will make it better on its own terms. Never saying, write like you should write the way I do, or she's saying to me, you should write the way she does. No, it's about each understanding the other's project. And people think two writers living together would be difficult, but it's actually a great advantage, I think. And then, because we met and got married, we have this extraordinary daughter, Sophie, who's known in Spain now as a wonderful singer. And, she's our, beloved child. And it's, I'm a lucky man, absolutely lucky. I live with a woman I love, and I do the work I love. And what more can you ask for? Yeah.
Bueno, pues con esto también.
I think we're done, huh?
We're done. Yeah. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Paul. It was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.